Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at the March 2002 issue of the Dealey Plaza Echo. It's a British journal, all about JFK. And we've got some really intriguing witness accounts and evidence, stuff you might not have heard before, especially stuff that challenges the whole Oswald acted alone thing.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be going beyond the Warren Commission report, looking at possible connections between Oswald and Jack Ruby that they may have overlooked.
Okay, cool. So the first article we're diving into is called Jake Rubenstein, Coger, the Carousel Club. This one starts with a guy named Daniel T. McGowan walking into an FBI office in Memphis in 1976. And get this, he claims he might have seen a letter addressed to Lee Harvey Oswald at Jack Ruby's club, way back in 1963.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that McGowan initially dismissed it as just a coincidence. It wasn't until after the assassination that the memory really started to eat at him.
Right, so he tells the FBI about this business trip he took to Dallas in March of 63. He ends up at Ruby's Carousel Club late one night with his cousin as the club was closing up. And then the next morning, he's back on Commerce Street, checking out the photos outside the club, when someone bumps into the mailbox, and some of the mail spills out.
Then that's where things get interesting. McGowan bends down to help pick up the mail, and he sees 3 letters addressed to Jake Rubenstein. Now, that was one of Ruby's aliases. 2 of the letters were from Fort Worth, but one was from Dallas, with the sender's last name being Oswald. Remember, this is months before Kennedy was even shot.
Hold on, wait a minute. So this guy sees mail for Oswald at Ruby's club in March. My mind is blown.
Well, and McGowan, being a naturally curious guy, he decides to try and find this Lee Oswald before his flight back to Memphis. So he tracks down the address, and what does he find? But a pretty upscale apartment building.
That's odd. Why would someone living in a fancy place like that be getting mail at a nightclub?
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions. And it gets even weirder. When McGowan gets to the building, he realizes that Lee Oswald is a man, not the woman that he pictured in his head. So he just leaves. But of course, after the assassination, this whole encounter takes on a whole new meaning for him.
Yeah, I bet. So did McGowan ever go to the authorities?
He did, but not right away. He wrestled with whether to come forward or not for years. He finally decided to tell the FBI his story in '76, and they did investigate. They found the Diceman Avenue apartment building that McGowan had described, but they ran into a problem. A fire in 1968 had destroyed all the tenant records.
Oh, so a dead end.
Well, not quite. The building manager told the FBI that Oswald couldn't have lived there because it was a mostly black neighborhood in '63, and people would have remembered a lone white guy living there. But the author of this article, William Weston, he wasn't satisfied with that. He found a former resident named Orlean Dorsey, who had lived in the building in '62 and '63.
Oh, so there's a different side to the story.
Exactly. Dorsey confirmed that both white and black people lived in the Cedar Crest apartments, which were actually in a nice area near a golf course. Dorsey even said that the rent was high, like around $210 a month.
Wow. Oswald was barely making anything and paying only $72 for his room on Neely Street. So if Oswald was getting mail at this Diceman address, it definitely wasn't his main place. Could this have been some kind of secret meeting spot for him and Ruby?
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
Weston did some digging, and he found that the occupancy rates for that building were really strange. In '62, only 5 out of 16 units were occupied, and even fewer in '63. But then in '64, it jumped to 15 out of 16.
Whoa, that is strange. What's going on there?
Well, this unusual pattern kind of suggests that this building wasn't your typical apartment complex. It's possible it was being used for some sort of clandestine activities, with just enough legitimate tenants to kind of avoid suspicion.
Okay, so maybe this Diceman apartment was some kind of safe house. But how does Oswald fit into all of this? Was he involved in something bigger than anyone realized?
That's what we're trying to figure out. And get this. On the very day that McGowan was at that apartment building, March 29, 1963, Oswald was actually in Sparta, Wisconsin. He told a barber there that he got money by blackmailing a Texas nightclub owner. He didn't say who, but...
Wait, are you serious? Could he have been talking about Ruby? Was that letter McGowan saw part of some blackmail scheme?
It's definitely something to think about. We're talking about a lot of what-ifs here, but the timing is definitely interesting.
Okay, so we've got this potential Oswald-Ruby connection through this mysterious letter, but this is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's move on to another article in this issue, which focuses on a wanted for treason leaflet that was circulating all over Dallas right before Kennedy's visit.
Oh yeah, this leaflet is pretty intense. It had pictures of Kennedy and listed all these reasons why he was supposedly a traitor. The Secret Service actually investigated it, trying to find out where it came from.
And did they?
They did. They traced it back to a printer named Robert Klaus, who eventually admitted that he printed them, for a man named Robert Allen Surrey. Now, Surrey was a close associate of General Edwin Walker.
General Walker, the guy who was a huge critic of Kennedy. Okay, now things are starting to get really interesting.
Right, so we have the printer of this inflammatory leaflet directly linked to one of Kennedy's biggest opponents. And it doesn't stop there. When Surrey was questioned by the Warren Commission about the leaflet, he kept pleading the Fifth Amendment.
So he refused to answer their questions. Basically to avoid incriminating himself. What was he hiding?
It definitely raises some red flags. What did Surrey know, and why wouldn't he talk about it? Was there more to this leaflet than meets the eye? Maybe even some foreknowledge of a plot against Kennedy.
Whoa, okay. So we've got McGowan's story about the letter possibly linking Oswald and Ruby. And now we have this wanted for treason leaflet. These are two separate pieces of the puzzle. But they both suggest something fishy was going on in Dallas. Where do we go from here?
Well, the article goes on to discuss a couple other incidents, including the shooting at General Walker's house in April 1963. Remember, this was about 7 months before the assassination.
Right, I remember reading about that. Someone took a shot at him while he was in his study. What's the connection to all of this? Wasn't Oswald suspected in that shooting as well?
He was. But this is where things get really murky. The article suggests that there's evidence pointing to Oswald not being the shooter.
Wait, what? So if Oswald didn't shoot at Walker, then who did and why?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and
Yeah.
we're going to get into those in the next part of our deep dive. This issue of the Dealey Plaza Echo is packed with information that challenges the official narrative of the JFK assassination, and we're just getting started. So before we jump into the Walker shooting, let's rewind a bit and talk about the man himself. You know, the article kind of paints this picture of him as this hardcore anti-communist, someone who really saw the world in black and white terms. He was actually investigated by the Army for trying to push his right-wing beliefs onto his troops.
Wow, so he wasn't just some random guy with extreme opinions. He had some real power and influence.
Exactly. And that's what made him such a divisive figure. You know, some people, especially those on the right, admired his strong stance. But others saw him as dangerous, like a threat to Kennedy's agenda.
Okay, so back to the shooting at his house. We're saying that Oswald might not have been the one who pulled the trigger. If that's true, was it like a legitimate attempt on Walker's life, or was there something else going on? The article mentions the possibility of it being staged.
Right. And that's where things get really murky. There are definitely some inconsistencies in the official story about the Walker shooting.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, the bullet they found at the scene was described as a 30.06 round, not the 6.5 Carcano bullet that Oswald supposedly used.
Yeah.
And despite what the Warren Commission concluded, the FBI couldn't actually link that bullet to Oswald.
Huh. Interesting. So that's one discrepancy. What else?
There's also the testimony of a teenager who was nearby and saw two men leaving the scene in a car right after the shooting.
Wait a minute. Remember how Surrey said he saw two suspicious men outside of Walker's house a couple of nights before the shooting? Could those be the same guys?
It's possible. And Surrey was very clear that neither of those men looked anything like Oswald.
Okay, so if it wasn't Oswald, who shot at Walker and why? You mentioned the article suggesting it might have been staged. That's a pretty wild theory. What would be the point of that?
It's definitely a disturbing idea. But given the political climate at the time, it's not completely outlandish. Think about it. Oswald was already being portrayed as this dangerous communist by the media. So if he was pinned with the Walker shooting, it would solidify that image.
I see what you mean. It would make Walker look like a victim of this communist aggression, and it would further demonize anyone with left-leaning views.
Exactly. And that kind of fear and division could be very useful for those who wanted to undermine Kennedy and his policies.
Okay, so we have a potential motive for staging the Walker shooting. But who would actually benefit from it? The article seems to imply that it could have been people who wanted to discredit the right wing and set Oswald up as a patsy.
That's one possibility. The article also dives into some of the connections between Surrey Walker and various right-wing groups, including the American Nazi Party.
Hold on. Are you serious? American Nazis were involved in all of this?
You might sound crazy, but yeah, there were active Nazi groups in the U.S. back then, and some of them were in Dallas. It's a part of history that's often overlooked.
Wow. I had no idea. So how do these groups connect to Surrey and Walker?
Well, the article mentions an FBI report from 1965 that identifies Surrey as the leader of a Dallas chapter of the American Nazi Party. And he also ran a publishing company with General Walker, and they called it American Eagle Publishing.
So they weren't just casual acquaintances, they were business partners, involved in these extremist groups. That's pretty unsettling.
It is. And it raises some serious questions about their potential role in the events leading up to the assassination. We have to remember that this was a time of intense political turmoil and paranoia, and these groups were actively trying to undermine Kennedy and his administration.
Okay, so we have this whole network of right-wing figures, some with links to extremist groups, and we're saying that Oswald might not have even been involved in the Walker shooting. But where does Oswald fit into all of this? Was he just a convenient scapegoat?
That's the big question, isn't it? The article suggests that Oswald might have been spying on these groups, maybe even working as an informant for the FBI.
Well, hold up. You're saying Oswald, the supposed communist, was spying on right-wing extremists? How does that even make sense?
I know it sounds bizarre, but hear me out. Oswald had defected to the Soviet Union a few years before the assassination, and when he returned to the U.S. with his Russian wife, Marina, the FBI was immediately watching him.
So they were suspicious of him, but they also might have seen him as a potential asset, someone who could infiltrate these groups and give them information.
Exactly. It's a complicated and confusing situation. But it's not impossible. And there's actually some evidence to support this theory. For example, the article mentions that Oswald was seen at a speech given by General Walker.
You're kidding, right? Why would a supposed communist like Oswald be anywhere near General Walker?
Right. It does seem counterintuitive. But his presence at these right-wing events, along with some other clues, suggests that he might have been more than just a curious bystander.
Like what clues? What else makes you think he was spying on these groups?
Well, the article points out that Oswald's notebook contained Walker's address and phone number. Not only that, but it also had the names of two high-ranking American Nazi Party members, Dan Burroughs and Lincoln Rockwell.
Wow, okay. That's pretty damning evidence. So was Oswald keeping tabs on these groups for the FBI? Or was there something else going on? Was he playing a more dangerous game?
That's what we need to unravel. You know, this deep dive is taking us down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and unanswered questions. It's hard to know what to believe.
I hear you. We have this possible Oswald Ruby connection through the letter at the club, then the wanted for treason leaflet, and now we're talking about Oswald potentially being an informant, spying on right-wing extremists. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit together.
You got it. And that's the thing about historical events like this, especially something as controversial as the JFK assassination. There's rarely a simple, straightforward answer. We're left with layers of misinformation, conflicting stories, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Well, I, for one, am hooked. What else did they find in this issue of the Dealey Plaza Echo? Is there more to this Oswald informant theory?
There is. The article goes into more detail about Oswald's possible role as an informant, and it raises even more questions about what he was really up to. So we're talking about Oswald maybe being an FBI informant, and the article really digs into this. And it's a tangled web, to say the least. It even brings up James Hosty, the FBI agent who interviewed Oswald and Marina, and there's this claim that Hosty and Suri were buddies, like playing bridge together regularly.
Wait, seriously, bridge. It sounds so casual. But we're talking about an FBI agent, potentially being chummy with a key figure in the Dallas right-wing movement. And remember, Hosty was the guy investigating Oswald, who is being painted as this communist threat.
It's definitely a head-scratcher. Hosty has denied knowing Suri, or even knowing how to play bridge for that matter. But even the suggestion of a connection like that raises questions. You know, was there some sort of conflict of interest? Could Hosty's relationship with Suri have influenced the investigation in any way?
It just adds another layer of suspicion to the whole thing. And this isn't the only time that the FBI's actions have fueled speculation around the assassination. But let's get back to Oswald's potential role as an informant.
Right. The article suggests that Oswald might have been keeping tabs on these right-wing groups, but it also brings up the possibility that he was playing a much more complex, even dangerous game.
Okay, break that down for me. How could he have been playing both sides?
Well, remember, Oswald had defected to the Soviet Union. And when he came back to the U.S. with Marina, the FBI had every reason to be suspicious of him. They put him under surveillance. But they might have also seen him as an opportunity.
So they could have tried to recruit him as an informant, to get inside information on these groups. But you said he was under surveillance. Wouldn't that defeat the purpose?
It does seem kind of contradictory, but it was a very complicated situation. On the one hand, they might have seen him as a valuable asset, someone who could infiltrate these potentially dangerous groups. But on the other hand, they were clearly wary of him. They didn't fully trust him. And they were keeping a close eye on his activities.
So are we talking about a double agent situation here? Was Oswald playing both the FBI and the Soviets?
That's a theory that some researchers have explored. and the article presents some evidence that seems to support it. For example, Oswald was seen at a meeting of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a pro-Castro group, in New Orleans in the summer of '63.
Right, and he was distributing those pro-Castro leaflets too. That whole incident with the anti-Castro Cuban exiles really painted him as a passionate Castro supporter.
Exactly. But some researchers believe that those actions were all part of a cover. They think he was trying to gain credibility within the pro-Castro movement so he could infiltrate it
Yeah.
and gather intelligence for the FBI.
That's a bold theory. Is there anything concrete to back that up?
It's mostly circumstantial, but the article does mention that Oswald was seen talking to an FBI agent in New Orleans just days before that confrontation with the Cuban exiles.
Wow, okay. So was he reporting to the FBI about his activities with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee? Or was he trying to manipulate both sides for his own agenda? It's impossible to know for sure.
You hit the nail on the head. We're dealing with a lot of speculation and unanswered questions here. When it comes to Oswald's motivations,
That is true.
his role in all this, he was a very complex and enigmatic figure,
Mhm.
and his actions have left a lasting mark on history.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from a mysterious letter at Jack Ruby's club to a wanted for treason leaflet and explored the possibility of a staged shooting and Oswald working as a double agent. It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think the most important takeaway from all of this is that the official narrative of the JFK assassination is not the whole story. There are alternative theories and evidence out there that challenge the idea of Oswald as a lone gunman.
And it makes you realize that history is rarely neat and tidy, you know? There are always multiple perspectives, hidden agendas, and unanswered questions. It's up to us to dig deeper, to look beyond the surface, and consider all the possibilities.
Exactly. We can't just accept the official narrative at face value. We have to be willing to ask difficult questions and challenge our assumptions.
Well said. So for our listeners who are now hooked on this tangled web of intrigue, I highly recommend checking out the original articles in the Dealey Plaza Echo. There's so much more to explore. And as you delve deeper into this research, keep this question in mind. If Oswald was truly spying on these right-wing groups, what information did he uncover? And who might have wanted him silenced? It's a question that might lead you down some very interesting paths. Until next time,